Boy refuses to speak in court until he sees his dog, and what happens next leaves the entire room stunned. The courtroom was steeped in an unbearable tension as all eyes turned to the witness stand. 12-year-old Ethan sat there, his expression a mix of sorrow and defiance. Today was a pivotal day. His testimony held the key to unveiling a grave injustice that had upended his family's life. Yet, despite the earnest pleas from lawyers and the expectant gazes of everyone present, Ethan remained utterly silent, his lips sealed by a pain too profound for words. For weeks, Ethan's silence had been the subject of hushed discussions among legal experts and family members alike. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, punctuated only by the shuffling of papers and the measured footsteps of court officers. The judge, maintaining a stoic demeanor, knew that the outcome of this trial might very well depend on the boy's long-awaited words. With each passing moment, the weight of expectation grew heavier, turning the room into a stage of agonizing suspense. Then came a surprising twist at the insistence of the defense attorney, who, with a calm yet resolute voice, suggested one last move. Let's bring in Ethan's dog. Bruno, an affable mixed breed with a shiny coat and soulful eyes, had been Ethan's steadfast companion throughout his troubled journey. Known for his uncanny ability to comfort and inspire courage in the young boy during his darkest hours, Bruno's presence was a beacon of hope. As Bruno entered the courtroom, a palpable shift occurred. Every eye was fixed on the loyal friend making his way down the aisle. In that moment, time itself seemed to slow. Ethan, who had been gazing down at the polished floor in an effort to hide his inner turmoil, lifted his eyes ever so slowly. A tremor passed through his small hands, and the entire courtroom held its breath, waiting for the breakthrough. What will Ethan do next? Can the bond with his beloved Bruno shatter the wall of silence in such a formal and high-stakes environment? As Bruno draws closer, every second brims with the promise of an unexpected, heart-wrenching revelation that will change everything. As Bruno's presence filled the courtroom, a tangible shift rippled through the atmosphere. The defense attorney, who had silently urged the arrival of the loyal canine companion, exchanged a hopeful glance with Ethan's mother, whose eyes shone with a mixture of relief and lingering worry. The room, still heavy with suspense from the introduction, now brimmed with anticipation. Every person present felt the weight of the moment, an unspoken promise that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Ethan, still seated at the witness stand, seemed frozen in time. His once downcast eyes, clouded by grief and fear, now flickered with a hesitant spark as they met Bruno's warm, steady gaze. It was as if the dog's soulful eyes communicated a silent message: "I'm here, and I'm with you." For years, Bruno had been Ethan's confidant in a world that had suddenly become cold and unresponsive after the traumatic events that led him to court. Bruno had been there during the darkest nights at home, offering quiet comfort without expecting words in return. In that moment, the courtroom became an echo of their shared past, a reminder of the unconditional bond forged through countless silent understandings. The prosecutor, who had long argued that Ethan's silence was a calculated refusal to confront the painful memories, couldn't help but be visibly taken aback. His confident tone faltered for a split second as he watched the subtle interplay of emotion between the boy and his dog. In that brief silence, the courtroom's rigid structure seemed to waver, and every witness, juror, and official felt the intensity of an unspoken connection that challenged the sterile nature of legal proceedings. Meanwhile, Ethan's father, standing just behind the witness stand, clenched his fists as he recalled the long, harrowing journey that had led them to this day. The family had endured a torrent of hardships, from the sudden loss of a loved one to the relentless pursuit of justice against those responsible. Yet, amidst the storm of legal battles and public scrutiny, one constant remained: Bruno. The dog had been a silent pillar of support, offering solace when words failed and mending broken spirits with his mere presence. Inside Ethan's mind, memories began to surface. The warmth of Bruno's fur during cold nights, the gentle nudge of his nose when Ethan was overwhelmed by grief, and the quiet assurance that no matter how dark the night, a loyal friend would always be there. But the courtroom, with its formal decorum and impersonal echoes of shuffling papers, was a far cry from those intimate moments. The contrast between that familiar sanctuary and the stark reality of a public trial was overwhelming. It was here that the boy's internal battle was fought, between the terror of confronting painful truths and the deep-seated need to reclaim his voice. As Bruno inched closer, every detail became magnified. The soft clink of his collar, the slight rustle of his fur, and the way his eyes never wavered from Ethan's, all of these quiet signals built a crescendo of hope within the boy. Yet, even as this surge of emotion threatened to break through his silence, Ethan's lips remained sealed. The tension was palpable. Every second felt like an eternity as the courtroom held its collective breath, waiting for the decisive moment that would shatter the barrier of silence. In hushed whispers, members of the audience exchanged glances and murmurs. Some wondered if the presence of Bruno would trigger an outpouring of words, while others speculated on the possibility of an unexpected twist in testimony. The defense attorney, sensing the shifting tide, stepped forward and softly addressed the courtroom. Sometimes, the strongest voices are not those that shout the loudest, but those that speak from the heart. His words resonated deeply with those present, underscoring the fragile hope that Bruno's arrival might be the catalyst for Ethan to finally confront his inner demons. In that moment of heightened suspense, the scene was set not only for a legal turning point, but for a personal rebirth. The connection between boy and dog had always been their secret language, a language of empathy, loyalty, and healing. Now, as the silent standoff continued, the promise of transformation hung in the air. Every eye, from the hardened judge to the teary-eyed jurors, awaited the breakthrough that might redefine the course of the trial, and more importantly, the future of a young boy who had been robbed of his voice. What would happen next? Would Ethan find the courage to let go of his silence and speak the truth that had been buried within him for so long? And if he did, how would his words reshape the narrative of a case that had already captured the hearts of many? As Bruno's warm presence radiated through the room, the stage was set for a moment of reckoning, a moment where hope, resilience, and the power of an unwavering bond could finally tip the scales toward healing and justice. The air in the courtroom felt heavier than ever, as though every breath drew in the shared hopes and fears of those present. Ethan remained perched on the witness stand, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of his seat. Bruno sat calmly at his feet, tail wagging in an almost reassuring rhythm. Yet Ethan's gaze darted from the dog to the rows of spectators, his eyes reflecting an inner storm that refused to calm. Across the aisle, the prosecutor's brow furrowed in frustration. He had planned to proceed with a cross-examination filled with precise, pointed questions that would force the boy to speak about the incident at the heart of the case. Instead, he found himself stalled by a profound silence that refused to break. Although the judge had permitted the dog's presence in a rare display of judicial empathy, it was unorthodox, and every second spent in this standstill seemed to challenge the traditional protocols of the court. Ethan's father shifted his weight, bracing himself against the railing behind the witness stand. He recalled the sleepless nights leading up to the trial, his son pacing the hallway in the dark, Bruno trotting at his side, the boy's lips trembling with words unspoken. This was the day they had both dreaded and anticipated, the day that might finally allow the truth to come to light. Yet, as the father watched Ethan's rigid posture, he felt a stab of concern. Perhaps they had pushed him too hard. Perhaps forcing him to relive the trauma in a formal setting was too great a burden. Meanwhile, Ethan's mother sat in the second row, fingers locked together in silent prayer. She'd prepared meticulously for this moment, working closely with therapists who believed that seeing Bruno might be the key to unlocking Ethan's suppressed voice. The logic was simple enough. Every time the boy was around his dog, even the bleakest mood tended to lift, if only for a moment. But would that be enough to pull him out of his trauma in front of so many strangers? Feeling the momentum slip from his grasp, the prosecutor cleared his throat and spoke up. "Your Honor, while I respect the court's decision to permit the animal, we are still no closer to hearing the testimony." His voice wavered slightly, betraying the tension he tried so carefully to hide. "I request a more direct approach. If the witness continues to remain silent, we may have to consider alternative methods of obtaining his account." Before the judge could respond, The defense attorney intervened. "Your Honor," she began, her tone measured and calm. "It has been less than 10 minutes since the dog entered the courtroom. Ethan deserves our patience. The trauma he experienced is not something to be rushed. We must give this child, Mixaya, who has already lost so much, every reasonable opportunity to speak on his own terms." A flicker of emotion crossed the judge's face. Leaning forward, she rested her chin on her hands. "This court is mindful that justice must be served," she pronounced carefully. "But we must also remember the age of the witness and the unique circumstances. I will allow a few more moments to see if the situation evolves. After that, we may need to revisit our strategy." A restrained sigh of relief emanated from the defense's side of the room, yet this respite only intensified the sense of urgency. Each second felt like a countdown to an inevitable clash between the necessity for truth and the weight of a child's unresolved anguish. Bruno let out a soft whine, drawing everyone's attention back to the witness stand. Lifting his muzzle, the dog nudged Ethan's leg gently, a reminder of their wordless bond. The boy blinked, as if pulled from a fog of painful memories, and lowered his hand to stroke Bruno's head. The simple act of contact, so small yet profound, seemed to anchor Ethan in the present moment. A ripple of hope swept through the courtroom. The defense attorney hesitated, contemplating whether to speak or stay silent. "Finally," she asked softly, "Ethan, can you tell us what you're thinking right now?" Her voice quivered with a delicate compassion that managed to slice through the tension. An agonizing pause followed. Ethan's lips parted, and for a fleeting instant, it seemed as though he might speak. Then, abruptly, he closed his mouth again, as though the words were too tangled to escape his throat. Disappointment flickered in the eyes of those who watched. But Bruno remained vigilant. The dog nudged him again, a warm and patient presence that refused to waver. Just then, the courtroom doors creaked open, drawing a cluster of curious bystanders. Word had spread quickly that an unusual emotional standoff was unfolding in courtroom 2. Whispers swept through the new arrivals, each person craning their neck for a better glimpse of the boy who refused to speak, and the dog who might change everything. The tension mounted like a swelling tide. Ethan felt the pressure of countless eyes upon him, analyzing every twitch of his fingers, every labored breath. The judge leaned back in her chair, arms folded, evaluating the delicate balance between the legal necessity for efficiency and the moral imperative to handle this child with care. The prosecutor tapped a pen against the desk, a faint but steady sound that underscored the courtroom's collective impatience. Some wondered if Bruno could do more than just stand by. Could the dog somehow spark a breakthrough? Others feared that the child might never utter a single syllable. If that happened, the entire case could crumble, leaving justice unserved and Ethan adrift in guilt and confusion. And still, Ethan sat in a silent struggle between the fear that had silenced him for so long and the yearning to be heard. Everyone sensed they were on the verge of a pivotal moment, an unseen boundary between the suffocating hold of the past and the possibility of release. With Bruno's unwavering gaze fixed on his best friend, one unspoken question hovered in the charged air. Would Ethan find the courage to speak, and if he did, how would his words reshape the fate of everyone in the room? A hushed expectancy pervaded the courtroom, like a collective breath waiting to be exhaled. All eyes remained fixed on Ethan and Bruno, hopeful that any second now the silence would fracture. Ethan's fingers trembled gently against the dog's fur, as if trying to draw courage from that gentle warmth. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, an unexpected voice broke through the tension. "Your Honor, I have new information that could bear directly on the child's willingness to speak," the defense attorney announced, her gaze shifting from the bench to the prosecutor's table. An undercurrent of surprise swept through the audience. Until this moment, no one had suggested there was additional evidence pertinent to Ethan's silence. The attorney took a slow, measured breath. "I received this not even an hour ago, passed along by an advocate who has been investigating the deeper circumstances surrounding Ethan's case." A stir coursed through the spectators. The prosecutor sat up straighter, pen poised over a legal pad. The judge signaled for the attorney to proceed, but Ethan's father stiffened, a flicker of apprehension crossing his features. It was as though he feared any unexpected revelation might push Ethan further into retreat. Clearing her throat, the attorney stepped forward, careful to keep her voice soothing. For reasons of privacy, I won't name the source. However, they have come across documentation, recordings to be precise, that indicate Ethan may have been directly threatened by individuals tied to this case. If that's true, it might explain why he hasn't been able to speak. A collective gasp rippled around the room. Even those who had believed that Ethan's refusal to testify was purely a symptom of trauma now found themselves grappling with the chilling idea that he might have been coerced into silence. The judge's expression darkened, and she fixed her gaze on the defense attorney. "Are you prepared to present these recordings to the court?" she asked, her voice firm but composed. The attorney nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. However, I must warn everyone. These are sensitive materials, and the content might be distressing. I also believe that hearing them may be the key to helping Ethan understand he is safe to speak. If he knows the court is aware of any threats, he might realize he no longer faces them alone." A flurry of debate ensued. The prosecutor hesitated, evidently blindsided by the potential bombshell. "Your Honor, I object to introducing evidence at this stage without proper vetting," he began, but the judge cut him off with an upraised hand. "We are dealing with a vulnerable child at the heart of this case," the judge said firmly. "I'll allow a brief recess so counsel can share these recordings with both the court and the prosecution. After I've reviewed them, I'll make a final ruling on their admissibility." The gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. Ethan visibly flinched at the sound, gripping Bruno's collar as though afraid something might tear them apart. Seeing this, the judge softened her tone. "Ethan will remain here with his dog until we reconvene." Then she turned to the bailiff. "Please escort counsel and any relevant parties to my chambers." In the sudden shuffle, spectators whispered in hushed excitement, and reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. Ethan's mother rose from her seat, wanting to rush forward, but a kind-faced court officer gestured for her to remain patient. The hush gave way to quiet murmurs, forming an undercurrent of mounting anticipation. For a brief moment, Ethan and Bruno were left alone on the witness stand, with only the watchful court officers and a handful of bystanders who hadn't immediately followed the exodus. The boy's father lingered close, exchanging worried looks with his wife. But Ethan seemed far away, drawn inward, as though retreating to a place no one else could see. He gazed down at Bruno, a silent question burning in his eyes. Is it really safe now? 45 minutes later, everyone returned, faces clouded with the weight of new revelations. The defense attorney appeared resolute, lips pressed into a firm line, while the prosecutor's jaw was set in grim determination. The judge settled onto the bench, an air of solemn gravity hanging about her. "Let the record reflect that we are back in session," she began, her voice carrying a calm authority. "Having reviewed the audio recordings, I find there is sufficient cause to believe that Ethan's silence may indeed be the result of intimidation or threats. These recordings, while not entirely conclusive, imply that unnamed individuals warned Ethan there would be serious consequences if he testified." A swell of outrage rippled among the spectators, an immediate, visceral reaction to the idea of threatening a child into silence. The judge continued, unperturbed. "Therefore, the recordings will be allowed as evidence, and we will ensure every measure is taken to guarantee Ethan's safety. I also insist on additional security for him and his family." She paused for a moment, letting the gravity of her words settle in. Then her gaze shifted to Ethan, who sat still, eyes downcast. The judge's tone softened, yet remained purposeful. "Ethan, you need to know that you are protected here. Those threats do not have power in this courtroom. If you decide to speak, you can do so freely." A lingering tension held the room captive until, suddenly, Bruno nuzzled the boy's cheek. A single tear slid down Ethan's face, a fragile thread hinting that the dam of silence might finally be cracking. He lifted his gaze toward the judge, then shifted it to the defense attorney, and finally let it rest on his parents in the gallery. All the while, his right hand stayed curled in Bruno's fur, as if drawing every ounce of courage from that loyal presence. The defense attorney leaned forward. "Ethan, do you understand what the judge is saying?" she asked softly. You're not alone in this. No matter what anyone said or did, you're surrounded by people who want to protect you." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Ethan's lips parted slightly. A tremor coursed through him, part fear, part resolve. It wasn't speech yet, but it was a flicker of possibility. A fragile promise that in the face of intimidation and terror, hope might triumph. Everyone in the courtroom braced for a moment that could redefine not only the trial, but the course of a life still so heartbreakingly entangled in trauma. Outside, the wind rattled the courthouse windows, as though echoing the gravity of the moment unfolding within. And in the hushed tension of that grand room, a new question arose alongside the twist. If Ethan chooses to speak, what secret has he been holding on to, and will it be enough to turn the tide of this entire case? A subdued murmur swept through the courtroom as it sank in that Ethan might be under threat. The judge's ruling, granting more robust protections and allowing the newly presented recordings as evidence, had shifted the course of the entire trial. No one could ignore the gravity of the situation. A child at the center of a legal storm, possibly silenced by fear of retaliation. It was enough to leave even seasoned legal professionals unsettled. Ethan's mother, tears brimming in her eyes, moved closer to the front row. She had spent many sleepless nights worrying about her son, but to know that unnamed individuals might have coerced him into silence felt like a blow to the chest. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her gaze riveted on Ethan and Bruno at the witness stand. The father, though standing only a few steps behind Ethan, looked equally stunned. His jaw tightened in visible anger. Anger at a system that had allowed such intimidation to fester, and anger at himself for not realizing sooner that his son's reticence might run deeper than simple trauma. Meanwhile, the defense attorney discreetly conferred with an aide at her side, who jotted down notes on a clipboard. Their expressions were a study in focused determination. This wasn't merely about winning a case anymore. It was about exposing the rotten underbelly of whatever forces had tried to bully a child. The attorney made a silent vow that she would do anything in her power to ensure Ethan's safety, and to empower him to speak, if he so chose. On the other side of the aisle, the prosecutor paced in short, deliberate steps, a mixture of frustration and astonishment playing across his features. He was a man accustomed to dealing with complexities, but rarely had he faced a scenario so emotionally charged. The notion that the key witness had been threatened was disquieting enough. That the threat involved a young boy, one who now had the sympathy of nearly everyone in the courtroom, complicated the prosecutor's strategy tenfold. He ran a hand through his hair, then turned to consult with an investigator at his elbow, no doubt discussing how to verify the authenticity and implications of the new recordings. Amid this swirl of reactions, the judge maintained a posture of steady composure on the bench. She was tasked with navigating turbulent waters, balancing the need for a swift but fair trial against the moral imperative to protect a vulnerable child. Her earlier decree for a recess had allowed a glimpse into the new evidence, but it was clear that more discussion would follow. As the murmurs began to subside, she signaled for quiet and addressed the courtroom. "In light of the recordings and the potential coercion, I will require both sides to meet with me in chambers after today's session," she said, her voice carefully neutral yet tinged with empathy. "Mr. Bailiff, please note that additional security personnel are to be assigned to the courthouse immediately. Also, ensure that the child, along with his family and counsel, is escorted safely to and from these proceedings." A steady rustle of feet and hushed voices followed the judge's directives. Court officers sprang into action, stepping to their posts with a renewed sense of vigilance. The unspoken message was clear. If someone had threatened Ethan, there was no guarantee those threats wouldn't escalate. Extra caution was now the order of the day. As all of this unfolded, Ethan hovered in his usual fragile silence on the witness stand. His eyes flickered over the faces of the judge, the attorneys, and his parents, each wearing a different mask of determination or worry. In that instant, the boy seemed to shoulder a weight far heavier than a 12-year-old should ever bear. Yet if any fear still clung to him, he found at least a measure of comfort in Bruno's calm presence beside him. The dog remained steadfast, as if somehow aware that his role was as crucial as any other in that chamber. A court officer approached gently, kneeling so as not to loom over Ethan. "Would you like some water?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Ethan shook his head, though his lips remained parted in the faint echo of the near attempt at speech from earlier. The officer nodded, respecting the boy's space, and retreated quietly. The defense attorney took a measured step forward. "Your Honor, I realize we're in a delicate situation. However, I'd like to ask if we can proceed carefully with further questions for Ethan, only if he's willing." She glanced down at Ethan, her tone softening. "We won't force him to speak, but it might help him, now that he knows he's protected." The prosecutor opened his mouth to protest, perhaps to argue that continuing was pointless without a clear statement from the boy, or that the new evidence needed thorough vetting. But the judge held up a hand again. "Before we move forward, I need to ensure the safety of the witness. Let me confer with both parties to discuss how we can proceed. We'll take a brief recess so we can set guidelines that protect Ethan from any further potential harm." At the judge's signal, the bailiff announced the recess. The tension in the room didn't dissipate, but it shifted, like a collective sigh of relief that at least some immediate steps were being taken to safeguard the boy. Lawyers and officials huddled in quiet clusters, planning the next moves, their voices low yet urgent. Meanwhile, Ethan's parents seized the chance to approach their son. His mother gently touched his shoulder, her tear-filled gaze brimming with compassion. "We're here for you," she whispered. "You know that, right?" Ethan gave the smallest nod. Next to him, Bruno's tail beat the ground in a gentle thump, as though echoing the mother's words with unwavering support. The father, his eyes haunted by guilt, knelt on Ethan's other side. "I'm sorry we didn't see it, son," he murmured. "I'm sorry we didn't realize you were keeping quiet because someone scared you. But I promise you, nobody's going to hurt you again." Though Ethan still said nothing, his grip on Bruno's fur tightened momentarily. It was a flicker of connection, of acknowledgement. For the first time that day, he allowed his parents to see just how profoundly he felt their love and concern, even if he couldn't yet articulate it. As the bailiff cleared the gallery, ushering out the curious onlookers and reporters for the duration of the recess, the boy and his dog stayed behind with the court officer. Through the tall windows, sunlight filtered in, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The sense of transition was palpable. Every person in that courtroom recognized they stood on the threshold of a new phase in the trial. Armed with new evidence and guided by an urgent imperative to protect Ethan, they prepared to reshape the legal battle unfolding within these walls. But one question still loomed, more pressing than ever. In the face of newly exposed threats and fresh hope for protection, would Ethan finally find his voice and dare to speak his truth? Outside the hushed courtroom, the day wore on, but the tension showed no signs of lifting. Clouds gathered overhead, mirroring the shadows of uncertainty that now loomed over Ethan's trial. Inside the courthouse hallway, extra security personnel stood vigilant, their presence a stark reminder that the boy's well-being was no longer taken for granted. While the legal teams met in the judge's chambers to determine how to protect Ethan effectively, a new ripple of intrigue took form just beyond the courthouse doors. A tall man in a dark suit paced along the marble floor in the lobby, glancing at his phone with a grim expression. His name was Trent Holloway, a local journalist renowned for pursuing stories that exposed corruption and ruffling more than a few feathers along the way. He had caught wind of the shocking turn in the trial, particularly the alleged threats against the boy. Where others saw a tragic situation, Trent saw a labyrinth of secrets ready to be unearthed. Trent's assignment started harmlessly enough, a simple profile on an atypical case involving a minor witness. But once he caught word that someone had tried to intimidate the child into silence, he sensed a deeper conspiracy. Why would anyone go to such lengths to muzzle a mere 12-year-old? He suspected a network of powerful individuals pulling strings from the shadows, and the more he discovered, the more determined he became to follow the thread to its source. Meanwhile, in a dim corner of the hallway, Ethan's parents stood arm in arm. Although the recess granted them a moment's respite from the intense scrutiny of the courtroom, it also opened the door to a new wave of concerns. They had been assured that the additional security detail would shield Ethan from danger, but the mother's anxious glances at each stranger passing by betrayed her persistent fears. Every ring of a cell phone, Every hurried footstep made her tense, as if expecting some fresh threat to strike. Their worries were not unfounded. Far from the courthouse, in a drab office cluttered with paperwork, a man whose face had not yet graced the courtroom scanned through emails on a battered laptop. Known only by the moniker Raymond among his associates, he was rumored to be the unseen hand orchestrating intimidation tactics in cases just like Ethan's. A cryptic message popped up on the screen. Court found out about recordings. They won't stay silent. Handle it. A flash of irritation crossed Raymond's face. He had hoped the threat alone would be enough to dissuade Ethan from testifying. Now, he realized he might have to escalate his tactics. Unseen by the public eye, he initiated a phone call. No greeting, no small talk, just a terse command that hinted at more trouble on the horizon. Back at the courthouse, the defense attorney emerged from the judge's chambers with measured urgency. She hurried over to Ethan's parents, quickly filling them in on the plan. "The judge is pushing for a protective order," she explained softly, her eyes moving from the father's stoic face to the mother's anxious one. "We'll have increased security for Ethan throughout the proceedings. But the judge also wants to press forward. She believes continuing the trial soon will send a clear message that we won't cave to intimidation. If we stall, it only gives the other side more time to maneuver." Ethan's mother exhaled a trembling sigh. "Whatever keeps him safe," she replied, voice laced with resolve. She glanced down the hall to where Ethan sat with Bruno, the dog resting its muzzle on the boy's knee. The father nodded, squaring his shoulders. "We'll do whatever it takes," he added. At that moment, Trent Holloway stepped up, clipboard tucked under one arm. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson," he greeted quietly, addressing Ethan's parents with an unusual gentleness. "I'm Trent Holloway, a journalist following this case. I'm so sorry about what your family is going through." Sensing their hesitation, he raised his free hand in a conciliatory gesture. "I'm not here to pry or to sensationalize. I'm investigating the possibility that the threats against Ethan might be part of a bigger network. If there's anything you can share." The father's expression hardened, caution etched into every line of his face. "We're not looking to make headlines," he replied in a low tone. "We just want our son to be safe." Trent nodded, understanding the subtext. "I get it, but stories like this, there's usually more going on beneath the surface. If a child is being intimidated, someone with power is afraid of what he might say." He offered a business card, glancing pointedly at the mother. "If you ever want to talk, no pressure. I just want the truth to come out." A moment of charged silence passed before the mother took the card. She didn't promise anything, but the look in her eyes conveyed a recognition that this journalist, whether helpful or not, had latched onto a crucial piece of the puzzle. Across the hall, the newly assigned security team escorted Ethan to a quieter annex, with Bruno trotting faithfully beside him. The officer leading the way kept a comforting hand near the boy's shoulder, ensuring no one approached without permission. On one side, Ethan felt a pang of reassurance that adults were stepping up to protect him. On the other, he felt the anxiety of being singled out, as though each layer of protection only emphasized how real the danger had become. As he sat on a bench in the annex, Ethan glanced around at the austere walls, clean yet impersonal, a stark contrast to the warmth of his home. Memories of the threats he'd heard replayed in his mind, that low, menacing voice warning him to keep quiet or else. A shudder rippled through him, but Bruno responded by pressing his nose against the boy's hand, a silent vow of loyalty. In that simple gesture, Ethan found a small reservoir of courage. He'd been so lost in fear that he'd shut everyone out, but the events of the day made him realize he wasn't alone. His parents, the judge, his attorney, and even the watchful presence of strangers like the journalist, they were all converging to shield him from harm. Yet the question gnawed at him still. Would that shield hold? The recess would soon end, and Ethan knew the trial would resume. With new subplots unfolding, an investigative journalist sniffing out a larger conspiracy, an anonymous figure seemingly orchestrating threats, and a legal system racing to adapt, he felt the stakes rise even higher. He needed to decide, remain silent and safe, or speak up and expose those who wanted him to live in fear. As a distant thunder rumbled outside, Ethan closed his eyes, holding Bruno's fur tight between his fingers, and braced himself for the challenges still to come. The open question remained. Would he find enough strength, enough of a reason to finally break his silence and reveal what only he knew? A dull echo of thunder reverberated through the courthouse windows as the proceedings were set to resume. Ethan sat in the annex, Bruno leaning against his leg, while the newly assigned officers formed a discreet perimeter. Outside in the corridor, the swirl of activity reflected the gravity of the unfolding situation. Lawyers hurried by with stacks of files, security guards stayed vigilant, and curious onlookers whispered theories about what might happen next. With the threat hanging in the air, the boy's every movement was now monitored, yet no one knew just how close danger might be lurking. In a moment of calm before stepping back into the courtroom, Ethan's parents joined him on the bench. The father's gaze flickered over the security detail, then returned to his son. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. Ethan looked at him, but still said nothing. Instead, he rested a hand on Bruno's head, a small gesture of reassurance or perhaps of gratitude for the dog's unwavering presence. The father swallowed a wave of guilt. Despite everything, he felt he should have anticipated the threat. Maybe if he had been more vigilant, Ethan wouldn't be facing this impossible choice. On the other side, the mother's face held an unspoken plea. She brushed a lock of hair away from Ethan's forehead, her voice quivering. "Sweetheart, we're going to do everything we can to keep you safe. No matter what they say or what they do, you're not alone in this." She paused, searching for any sign that her words reached him. Though Ethan remained silent, he squeezed her hand gently, and a flicker of relief passed through her features. Meanwhile, down the hall, defense attorney Parker was in hushed conversation with Trent Holloway, the journalist. Parker's jaw was set, and she kept casting uneasy glances at the thick security doors that led to the annex. "I appreciate that you want to help expose whoever's threatening my client," she said, voice laced with tension. "But I have to protect Ethan first. If releasing any details prematurely puts him in greater danger." Trent nodded, pushing a pen behind his ear. "I understand. I'm not here to sensationalize this. Believe me. I'm trying to figure out where the intimidation might be coming from. If there's a bigger network involved, we have to peel it back layer by layer, or they'll just disappear into the shadows again. But I won't publish anything that endangers that boy." The attorney studied Trent's earnest expression. "Just be careful," she said at last. "We don't know how far these people will go. If you start digging around, you might make yourself a target too." His response was a wry half-smile that suggested he'd encountered threats before. "I've handled tough stories, but I've never seen anyone stoop to threatening a child. That tells me they're desperate. Maybe this boy's testimony could blow the lid off something significant." Their discussion was cut short by a bailiff motioning them to return to the courtroom. The recess was over, and everyone needed to be in place for the trial to continue. Parker gave Trent a final, firm look before she slipped inside, heading straight for the defense table. In her mind, two parallel tracks raced: how to legally dismantle the opposition's case and how to safeguard a child who might hold the key to unraveling a conspiracy. Meanwhile, Ethan and his parents were led by security back into the cavernous courtroom. Bruno stayed glued to his side, the dog's presence now an accepted, if highly unusual, fixture in this drama. Each step forward felt like another step deeper into an unknown territory where legal strategy, personal trauma, and unseen threats converged. At the defense table, Parker caught Ethan's eye. She mouthed silently, "We have your back." The judge soon entered, robes gently swishing, and banged her gavel to bring the room to order. The hush that fell over the crowd felt different this time, less curious and more charged, as if everyone sensed that the stakes had soared since the new evidence emerged. "Counsel," the judge began, her voice echoing in the stillness, "in light of the recordings indicating intimidation, we will proceed with the greatest caution to protect the witness. We shall hear from any additional experts or investigators you have at this time." The prosecutor stood, clearly still unsettled by the day's developments. He glanced toward Ethan, who watched him with wary eyes. "Your Honor, we believe the child's testimony is essential to clarify the timeline of events. While we respect his situation, we do need him to speak on record. If he can confirm certain details, It would resolve many disputed points. Next, it was Parker's turn. She moved closer to the front of the courtroom, her voice calm yet resolute. We understand the importance of Ethan's testimony, but we must ensure he is ready to speak of his own free will. If we force him, knowing the threats he's faced, we risk deepening his trauma. We're asking for measured, deliberate questioning and the latitude to let him respond without undue pressure. Moreover, we request that Bruno remain by his side throughout any testimony. She paused, letting her gaze drift across the spectators. This isn't conventional procedure, but none of this is conventional. The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. In these exceptional circumstances, I'll allow the dog to stay, but be advised, counsel, we cannot stall indefinitely. The court must see evidence, hear testimony, and work toward a conclusion. A new hush descended. Ethan, seated once again at the witness stand with Bruno at his feet, felt all eyes land squarely on him. The father hovered at the edge of his line of sight, wrestling with an internal debate. Is it selfish to push Ethan to speak for the sake of justice, or is it necessary to prevent others from being harmed? The mother's expression revealed a mirrored conflict. She wanted justice to be served. She also dreaded the emotional toll it could exact from her fragile son. And then, as if signaled by an unspoken cue, Ethan lifted his head. Fear clouded his gaze, but so did determination. Bruno nudged the boy's arm, and Ethan slowly stroked the dog's soft ears, drawing confidence from the simple act. For the first time, his eyes swept the faces in front of him, the judge, the attorneys, the strangers in the audience, his parents, and finally, the menacing presence of the prosecution's side, people who, in his mind, represented the system that had failed to protect him thus far. The emotional weight of the moment bore down on him. He was caught between two fires: remain silent and let injustice fester, or speak and risk unknown retaliation. Yet within that storm of doubt, a fragile flame of bravery flickered. It seemed to say that if he stayed quiet now, he might never escape the grip of fear. His lips parted slightly, as if testing the courage to produce a sound. The entire courtroom leaned forward in breathless anticipation. Then, with a shaky exhale, Ethan shut his mouth again, evidently not quite ready, but something in his eyes said that the moment of truth was drawing near. If anything, the tension only thickened, forging a new question in the minds of all present. When Ethan finally does speak, will his words illuminate a path to justice, or unleash a tempest that could turn this trial, and his life, upside down? A rumble of thunder echoed faintly in the distance, as the courtroom's intensity rose to an almost suffocating peak. The judge looked between the prosecutor and defense counsel, her expression iron-willed but conflicted. Despite Ethan's evident struggle, the proceedings had to move forward. There could be no indefinite stalemate. Yet everyone sensed that pushing the boy too hard might shatter what little courage he'd managed to gather. Tension ratcheted higher when the prosecutor called forward an unexpected witness. A soft-spoken forensic technician named Miss Hodge. She approached the stand with a manila folder clutched tightly in her hands, quietly explaining that she had re-examined digital metadata from the day of the incident, data that might either corroborate or contradict Ethan's account, if he ever managed to speak it. The audience exchanged puzzled glances, and even the defense attorney arched an eyebrow, not expecting new evidence from this angle. As Ms. Hodge opened the folder, she revealed a series of still images, footage pulled from security cameras near the location of the alleged crime. Her voice trembled slightly as she explained, "I found anomalies in the timestamps. Some frames appear to have been tampered with before they reached our archives." She paused, swallowing hard. "It looks like someone was trying to erase parts of the video that might be crucial to understanding the full timeline." A spike of unease coursed through the room. Was there a coordinated effort to distort evidence? The prosecutor's expression clouded. It was clear he had not anticipated this degree of tampering, and his earlier confidence wavered. The judge's gaze shifted sharply to the defense. "Counsel, do you have any insight into who might have altered these recordings?" "Not yet, Your Honor," the defense attorney responded, her fingers tapping pensively on the table. "But it raises serious questions about the integrity of the evidence, and about who has enough influence or skill to alter official footage. That's highly sophisticated work. In the gallery, Ethan's parents exchanged anxious looks. Could the same individuals who threatened Ethan be behind the doctored recordings? If so, the conspiracy might be deeper than anyone realized. Meanwhile, Bruno, sensing a shift in mood, let out a quiet whine. Ethan's hand instinctively reached for the dog's collar, knuckles whitening. Fear flickered in his eyes, as if the mention of falsified footage confirmed the scope of the danger around him. On the far side of the courtroom, journalist Trent Holloway scribbled notes at a feverish pace. His keen instincts told him that Miss Hodges' testimony wasn't just a minor development. It was a bombshell that could blow open the question of who truly stood to gain from silencing Ethan. The more complicated the plot became, the more determined Trent was to uncover the real power players. If advanced digital tampering was at play, it pointed to resources far beyond a single rogue intimidator. It signaled a network of individuals willing to manipulate evidence and, apparently, to threaten a child, to keep the truth hidden. At the defense table, the attorney glanced over to Ethan with a sympathetic smile. She approached the bench and quietly asked for permission to have Mrs. Hodges' new findings entered into evidence so the entire court could formally review it. The judge consented, ordering that all relevant parties be given immediate access. Then, turning her attention to Ethan, she spoke in a measured but gentle tone. "Son, this might be your chance," she said quietly, "to confirm or clarify what happened that day. These images, do you recall seeing anything or anyone that might explain why the footage was altered? You can nod, shake your head, or speak if you're able." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of overhead lights. Ethan's gaze darted to the projected images of the doctored footage, his expression torn between alarm and a flicker of recognition. Bruno pressed closer, panting softly, as though urging him forward. Time seemed to slow as Ethan took one shuddering breath. But just as his lips parted, the courtroom doors banged open. A court officer rushed in, breathless. "Your Honor, there's an issue in the corridor." The officer's urgent tone cut through the building tension like a blade. "One of our security cameras outside was just disabled. We have reason to believe someone might be attempting unauthorized entry." A ripple of alarm coursed through the room. The judge's eyes flashed with concern. "Where exactly?" "Near the side entrance to the building," the officer replied. "It's the same door used for after-hours access, usually locked down unless there's a high-profile case. We've got men checking it now." Ethan's mother tightened her grip on her husband's hand. Fear etched into her features. The father's jaw went taut. He exchanged a glance with his wife that spoke volumes. How far are these people willing to go? The judge rapped her gavel to regain order as hushed whispers rippled among the spectators. "All right, we will briefly recess again," she declared. "This court cannot proceed under the threat of a security breach. Officers, ensure that Mr. Wilson and his family remain safe. I want a thorough sweep of every entrance and corridor." With that, the judge signaled the bailiff to escort Ethan, his parents, and Bruno to a secure area. The tension in the courtroom peaked. Everyone knew that this was no mere procedural glitch. It carried the distinct stench of sabotage or intimidation. By the time the father scooped up his son's shoulders, Ethan's face had lost what little color it had. This place, meant to be a bastion of justice, felt less safe by the minute. Outside in the corridor once again, they found themselves shrouded by the watchful presence of armed guards. Ethan's heart pounded against his ribcage. Shadows seemed to loom at every corner. Even the mother, usually so adept at comforting her child, was at a loss for words. As they hurried toward a secure conference room, Bruno's nails clicked on the polished floors, a tiny counter-rhythm to the quickened steps of the security team. Meanwhile, behind closed doors elsewhere in the building, an unknown figure muttered curses into a cell phone. Raymond, though few knew his name, was furious. That camera he'd meant to disable had triggered an alarm more quickly than anticipated, drawing unwanted attention. "We should have had more time," he hissed into the receiver. "Find a way in or find another plan. I won't let this slip just because of some dog and a scared kid." Back in the hush of the now empty courtroom, the images Ms. Hodge had presented remained projected on the screen, a haunting tableau of doctored timestamps and missing frames. They were a stark reminder that Ethan's story, whatever it was, posed a threat to powerful interests. For the moment, the trial was at a standstill, overshadowed by an imminent threat. But the momentum of truth was growing, fueled by mounting revelations of tampered evidence and invasive intruders. One thing was certain: the individuals behind the intimidation were no longer content with subtle threats. With each new escalation, Ethan's decision to speak or remain silent became a matter of life-altering consequence. And as the thunder outside the courthouse gave way to the patter of rain on the windows, it was clear that this sudden storm, both literal and metaphorical, was far from over. The stage was now set for a showdown where justice would clash head-on with covert power, and where a boy's fragile courage might prove the linchpin to unravel it all. Outside, rain drummed against the courthouse windows, a steady, insistent rhythm that seemed to amplify the tension within. In a heavily secured conference room, Ethan and his parents huddled under the watchful eyes of two stern-faced officers. Bruno rested quietly at Ethan's side, his constant presence a reminder that not everything in this day was shadowed by fear. Occasionally, the dog would look up at the boy, offering a calm, unwavering gaze that wordlessly said, "I'm here." Ethan's father rubbed his forehead, clearly torn between frustration and concern. "This is unreal," he muttered, glancing at the guards, who pretended not to hear. "We came here for justice, and it feels like we're trapped in some kind of siege." His wife placed a hand on his shoulder. "Better to be cautious. Whoever's behind these threats, they aren't taking any chances." She lowered her voice, mindful that Ethan could still hear. "They're serious." One of the guards, a tall woman with a calm demeanor, flicked her gaze toward the couple. "We understand this is overwhelming," she said gently, "but we have protocols in place. No one is getting near your son without authorization, I promise." In another part of the courthouse, journalist Trent Holloway stealthily navigated the corridors, scribbling notes and trying not to draw attention from the extra security. His mind raced through the puzzle pieces: tampered surveillance footage, direct threats against a child witness, and an unexplained attempt to breach the building's security. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became that a carefully orchestrated effort aimed to muzzle Ethan. If Trent could prove the link to a larger conspiracy, it might not only protect Ethan, but expose corruption on a grand scale. He paused by a vending machine, flipping through the notes on his phone. A whisper of a tip from a confidential source had mentioned a certain Raymond E., known among local circles for handling clandestine tasks, intimidation, evidence manipulation, and occasional bribery. Though no one had pinned Raymond to a specific identity, rumors suggested he worked for clients with pockets deep enough to bury problems. Now it seemed that Ethan and his testimony had become one such problem. Trent's breath hitched as he realized how dangerous this man could be. Meanwhile, in a separate makeshift security office, the defense attorney huddled with a pair of investigators and Ms. Hodge, the forensic tech who had discovered the doctored footage. A dim lamp cast flickering shadows on a spread of photographs and data sheets. "All right," Parker said, tapping a finger on the table. "We have partial timestamps, frames that were edited. Ms. Hodge, if we figure out which segments are missing, can we narrow down exactly what was removed?" Ms. Hodge nodded, pushing her glasses up her nose. "I believe so. There are periods, seconds here, minutes there, where the feed abruptly loops or cuts. If I can analyze the raw data, I can make an educated guess about what was hidden. A person walking past at a certain second, a vehicle driving away, something that could contradict the story someone wants the court to hear." Parker's gaze sharpened. "The question is, who benefits most from altering the timeline? It suggests a motive to keep Ethan from testifying. His testimony might confirm details from that missing footage. We need him to speak, but we also have to ensure his safety." One of the investigators, a former detective with a thoughtful demeanor, chimed in. "The new security breach might be an attempt to destroy any other evidence we have here, or worse, to pressure the boy again. We'll focus on identifying the suspect. In the meantime, we keep the family under constant guard." Parker exhaled, a knot of anxiety sitting behind her sternum. The stakes had soared beyond a single trial. There was now a real fear that if they couldn't contain the threat, someone might attempt a direct attack on Ethan or the evidence. Yet, the potential payoff, unmasking a major operation of criminal tampering, was equally high. She felt the weight of it all on her shoulders, but her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about protecting an innocent child and exposing a ring of corruption that operated in the shadows. Back in the secure conference room, Ethan and his parents braced themselves as the judge herself entered, flanked by 2 more officers. The judge's expression was resolute. She was not one to yield under pressure. With her came defense attorney Parker, looking fatigued but determined. Clearing her throat, the judge approached Ethan gently. "Young man, I'm sorry about all these frightening developments. I wish I could give you more time to recover, but this situation won't wait forever." She knelt slightly, bringing herself closer to the boy's eye level. "Your attorney can guide you, and your parents and dog are here for support. If you're willing, we want to ask you just a few questions. Your words could make a difference." Her tone was warm, but a thread of urgency underpinned every syllable. Ethan's heart pounded, his mind swirling with memories of menacing voices on the phone and shadowy figures who had cornered him after the incident. He squeezed his eyes shut. Images flashed, the day it happened, details he wished he could forget. But he also saw Bruno, wagging his tail on nights when Ethan thought he might never feel safe again. The dog's presence now reminded him that, despite all the fear, he wasn't standing alone. Glancing up, Ethan caught his mother's gaze, a mixture of love and pleading. His father's stoic nod conveyed both encouragement and concern. Slowly, he looked at Parker, who offered him a tender smile. No one was pressing him with words, but their silent hope spoke volumes. Finally, Ethan nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Parker exhaled, a quiet relief. She signaled to the judge with a slight dip of her head, "Let's move to a more private setting. Your Honor, if you agree, we can record Ethan's testimony in chambers with only essential personnel present. That way, he won't have an audience full of strangers watching him." The judge weighed this, then nodded. "That would be acceptable. We're trying to protect the integrity of the trial and the well-being of the witness." A swell of cautious optimism rippled through the room. The father gently placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, while the mother leaned in, kissing his temple. Bruno pressed close, tail softly wagging. Though the tension remained thick, a renewed sense of purpose emerged. With new evidence tying clandestine tampering to the intimidation campaign, and Ethan appearing on the verge of finally breaking his silence, there was a possibility that truth and justice might prevail if they could move fast enough to outrun the next looming threat. As the small group prepared to relocate to the judge's chambers, a single question pulsed in the minds of everyone who had placed their trust in this boy's courage. Would Ethan's testimony, and the hidden footage he might corroborate, finally tear down the wall of corruption aimed at silencing him? Under the glow of harsh overhead lighting, the judge's chambers felt far more intimate than the grand courtroom. Yet the air crackled with heightened tension. The small group filed in, Ethan clutching Bruno's leash as though it were a lifeline, his parents visibly on edge, the defense attorney, steeled by determination, and 2 armed officers scanning every corner as if an unseen threat might materialize at any moment. The judge occupied a modest seat at the head of a sturdy wooden table, framed by shelves of thick law books. "Please, have a seat," she said softly, gesturing toward a row of chairs. She studied Ethan with a measured calm, her gaze full of understanding. "We're recording this session to preserve your testimony, but only essential personnel will listen. I'd like to ensure you're comfortable enough to speak freely." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He lowered himself into a chair, Bruno settling at his feet. The boy glanced at the video recorder set up on a tripod near the corner, then at the judge's solemn expression. Comfortable wasn't the right word. Even with fewer eyes on him, he sensed the enormity of what was about to unfold. Deep down, he knew that once he spoke, there would be no going back. The intimidation he'd faced, the tampered evidence, it all pointed to powerful people who wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. The defense attorney cleared her throat, carefully choosing her words. "Ethan, first and foremost, do you understand that you're safe here? The court, the officers, your parents, we're all committed to protecting you." For the briefest moment, Ethan's gaze flicked toward his father and mother. He saw the fear in their eyes, but also a fierceness he hadn't fully noticed before. They weren't going anywhere without him. With a shaky nod, he offered a wordless acknowledgement. "Good," she continued. "And you're aware that we suspect someone is tampering with evidence, footage that might confirm what you witnessed on the day in question, right?" Another small nod. His heart thudded in his chest. The judge stepped in, her voice even-toned. "Ethan, if you're ready, could you tell us, without pushing yourself more than you can handle, what happened that day? Specifically, what did you see or hear that might be connected to the case?" A hush descended, thick with anticipation. Bruno shifted, leaning into Ethan as if to nudge him gently forward. The boy took one deep breath, then another, eyes shut tight as he summoned a courage he'd never before needed. Finally, after what felt like an endless pause, he opened his mouth. "It was in the afternoon," Ethan began, his voice barely above a whisper but steady. "I'd gone to the park near the old storage building. Bruno was with me. He ran off for a second, chasing a squirrel, so I followed him. And then I saw—" He faltered. A tremor passed through him, stirring a surge of protective instinct in his parents. The judge gave a gentle nod, indicating that he should take his time. Slowly, Ethan exhaled, focusing on the memory. "There were these two men," he finally continued. "One was bigger, wearing a dark jacket. They were arguing loudly. Something about money, a deal that had gone wrong. Then, out of nowhere, the bigger man pushed the other and—" He squeezed his eyes shut, as though replaying a scene he'd tried to bury. "He pulled out something like a gun. I'm not sure if it was real, but it looked real. He pressed it to the other guy's stomach. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Bruno barked, and that's when they noticed me." The father's face went pale, and the mother stifled a gasp. The attorney remained stone-faced, but her grip on the edge of the table tightened. "What happened next?" the judge prodded gently. "The second man yelled at me to go away. I turned to run, but then the big one said—" Ethan's breathing quickened. "He said, 'If you tell anyone what you saw, you'll regret it. Don't even think about talking to the cops.'" A jolt of realization flashed across the defense attorney's features. This explained so much: why Ethan had clammed up, why he was paralyzed by fear of speaking in an official context. Yet, she suspected there was more. "Could you describe them? What they looked like? Any details?" she asked. Ethan's brow furrowed as he fought to recall specifics. "The big man had a scar here," he pointed beneath his left cheek, "and a shaved head. The other was shorter, skinny, wearing a baseball cap. But I remember the big one used a name. He kept saying Raymond told me to handle it. Something about not messing up again. That's when the smaller man started stammering, saying, 'This wasn't my fault.' And that's when I ran." A collective weight seemed to lift and descend simultaneously in the room. The name Raymond connected the intimidation Ethan experienced to the rumored orchestrator. Journalist Trent Holloway's earlier hunch about a figure named Raymond might prove correct. The father's fists clenched on his lap, furious that such a threat was aimed at his son, and possibly at others. "Thank you, Ethan," the judge said softly, compassion in her voice. "You've been very brave. This is significant information. It could explain why someone's tampering with the footage, to hide evidence of that confrontation." A subdued relief coursed among the small group. They finally had a name, a scenario. But that relief was short-lived, because as soon as Ethan finished, an officer at the door straightened, hand going to his earpiece. A look of alarm crossed the guard's face. "Judge," he said urgently, "the security team just received a distress call from the main entrance. There's an intruder, possibly armed, trying to get in. We need to move you all now." A cold chill swept through Ethan's spine. The father jumped to his feet, his mother half rising, eyes wild with fear. Bruno growled softly, sensing the surge of danger. The attorney quickly saved the recording on her device, handing the memory card to the judge, who tucked it inside a secure envelope. "Officers, take them to a safer location," the judge ordered, her tone unyielding. "This information cannot fall into the wrong hands." In a blink, the carefully orchestrated testimony session crumbled into a scramble for protection. The father scooped Ethan up by the shoulders, guiding him toward a side exit, as Bruno stayed glued to the boy's side. The mother kept pace, A trembling hand pressed to her mouth. The attorney, heart-pounding, clutched her briefcase, knowing that the next few minutes could decide whether Ethan's revelations would see the light or be buried under threats and possible violence. The corridors outside reverberated with urgent footfalls and the sharp crackle of radio chatter. Though they'd finally reached a critical turning point with Ethan's testimony, the cost of that breakthrough was a sudden escalation of peril. Now, with an intruder at the gates, the question wasn't just about how justice might prevail, but whether they would make it out of the courthouse safely at all. The hallway erupted in a flurry of motion. Security officers formed a protective ring around Ethan and his family, ushering them away from the judge's chambers. The urgent crackle of radios filled the air, their static-laced voices calling for backup at the main entrance. No one knew exactly how many intruders there were or how far they were willing to go, only that an immediate threat pressed at the courthouse doors. Ethan's parents each held one of his arms, trying to stay close enough for comfort, but also ready to move at a moment's notice. Bruno, glued to Ethan's side, let out a low growl, his own instinctual warning that danger lurked close by. A determined set had taken over Ethan's features, his fear now laced with a spark of new resolve. Whatever was happening, he wouldn't let these people silence him again. Near the stairwell, they came face to face with the defense attorney, Parker, who clutched her briefcase like it was a precious relic. She gave them a quick once-over, checking if they were all right. "We need to get you into the panic room," she said, her voice taut but controlled. "It's in the basement, reinforced walls, limited access. It's the safest place until we know the courthouse is secure." The father's gaze flicked to the officers. "So you heard her, let's go," he urged. Moments earlier, he had been trembling with rage at the threats facing his son, but now his protective instincts blazed. If they stayed out in the open any longer, they would remain prime targets. A quick descent down a back stairwell followed. Every footstep echoed ominously, and the tension thickened with each step. Rain pelted the windows at the landings, lightning flickering in the distance, a fitting backdrop for the storm brewing both inside and outside the courthouse. It felt like the entire world was conspiring to amplify the drama of this moment. Down in the basement corridor, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The group made its way to a solid steel door marked authorized personnel only. A uniformed guard keyed in a code on the electronic lock, which clicked open with a hiss. Beyond lay a stark, windowless room lined with reinforced walls and stocked with chairs, water and emergency supplies. A single security camera pointed down from one corner. "In here," one of the officers said, standing aside to let Ethan, his parents, Bruno and Parker enter first. Then the officer stepped in behind them. Two more guards took up positions just outside the door. An overwhelming sense of relief washed over Ethan's mother as she realized they were, for the moment, safer than anywhere else in the building. Still, no one was entirely at ease. Parker nodded in acknowledgement when another guard handed her a small metal container. She slipped the memory card containing Ethan's recorded testimony into it and snapped it shut with a trembling breath. The father noticed. "That's it?" he asked softly. "That's what they want to bury?" She nodded. "Ethan's testimony, plus any digital evidence we can recover from Miss Hodges' analysis. We have enough to name Raymond as a central figure. If this goes to trial..." She paused, pressing her lips together. "Actually, when it goes to trial, if we're successful, we'll expose an entire chain of corruption. But first we have to get out of here safe." At the mention of Raymond, Ethan flinched. His fingers curled in Bruno's fur, drawing comfort from the dog's unwavering presence. The memory of that confrontation in the park haunted him. The barrel of a gun, the snarled threat, and the chilling words, "Raymond told me to handle it." The mother gently rubbed her son's back, sensing the flash of fear behind his eyes. "You did the right thing by telling the truth," she whispered. "We'll protect you." Suddenly, the radio on the guard's belt crackled. "Main entrance compromised. Multiple intruders, armed. We have them contained in the lobby, but we need all available officers. Keep the witness secured." A heavy silence descended on the room. The officer nodded solemnly at Parker and the family. "Sounds like a full-on breach. We'll hold position here." Tension soared. Even with the thick steel door and reinforced walls, no one felt invulnerable. If a group was brazen enough to bring weapons into a courthouse, who knew how far they would go to reach Ethan, or the evidence that could bring them down? Ethan's father inhaled sharply, standing straighter. We can't hide here forever. If we wait too long, they might find another way inside. The longer this goes on, the bigger the chance someone gets hurt. His wife swallowed hard, her eyes darting to Ethan. But we also can't walk into a firefight. Before Parker could respond, the guard on duty stepped forward. You're right. We'll do a head count and coordinate with the rest of the security team. Once we know the situation is contained, we can extract you safely. In the meantime, nobody opens this door without the code. Understood? Nods all around. The father knelt by Ethan, meeting him at eye level. How are you doing? He asked, voice hushed. Ethan's lips formed a tight line. He glanced around at the grim faces, the steely door, the fluorescent lights casting sharp shadows. Then he patted Bruno's head once more. I'm okay, he finally managed. Though his voice wavered, the resolve was clear. He wasn't that terrified child in the park anymore. He might have been forced into silence, but he had spoken, and it was on record. No matter what happened next, a critical step toward justice had been taken. Parker's phone buzzed, a single text message from Mr. Hodge, who had remained in the makeshift security office upstairs. Extracting raw footage. Almost done. Data transfer in progress. Parker's heart soared at the possibility they might retrieve the missing frames that corroborated Ethan's testimony. But with armed intruders at the entrance, there was no guarantee Miss Hodge would finish safely. Every second teetered between triumph and disaster. As the father stood, Bruno let out a low huff, nosing at Ethan's hand as if to say, "Stay calm, I've got you." A wave of gratitude sparked across Ethan's gaze. This dog had done more than offer emotional support. He was a steadfast partner in bravery, unwavering in the face of each daunting threat. Outside the panic room, muffled commotion ricocheted through the concrete corridors. Footfalls, shouts, doors slamming. The standoff had reached a boiling point, and the group inside the sealed room knew that the next move could come at any moment. If law enforcement managed to quell the situation, they'd walk out with the truth firmly in hand. But if the intruders broke through, Ethan ran a hand over Bruno's ears, grounding himself in that single point of calm. Confrontation was raging just beyond these walls, yet he clung to one fact. His voice, once silenced by intimidation, had found its way into the record. One glance at the memory card in Parker's possession served as a potent reminder that he'd made his choice, to speak rather than remain a prisoner of fear. Now, as the pounding of footsteps echoed ever closer, they all wondered, would Ethan's courageous testimony and the gathered evidence survive the final surge of conflict, or would the forces hell-bent on erasing the truth manage to stamp it out once and for all? Outside the reinforced door of the panic room, chaos reverberated through the basement corridors. Shouts, urgent footfalls, and the echo of distant scuffles filled the thick air. The standoff at the courthouse had entered a critical phase, and every soul within the fortified shelter knew that the next moments could determine the fate of Ethan, his testimony, and the entire trial. Ethan stood close to his parents. Bruno pressed reassuringly against his leg. On the far side of the cramped room, defense attorney Parker and the two armed officers maintained watchful stances. Though the panic room was secure, no one could ignore the growing threat. If the intruders managed to push deeper into the courthouse, even these steel walls might not be enough. The father clenched his jaw, listening to the muffled radio chatter from the guard's earpiece. "They're still in the lobby," the guard murmured, turning to the group. "We have a SWAT team en route, but their arrival's been delayed by the storm. Heavy rain, slick roads, it's slowing everyone down." A flicker of worry darted through Parker's eyes. "They won't leave quietly," she said, glancing at the sealed metal container protecting the memory card of Ethan's testimony. "Not if they think we still have evidence that can implicate them." At that, Ethan's mother let out a shaky breath. "We've come so far," she whispered. "We can't let them destroy everything now." The father reached for her hand, giving it a firm squeeze. "We won't," he promised, though his own voice quivered with a blend of anger and fear. Turning his gaze to Ethan, he offered a half smile. "You did the hardest part, son. You told the truth, That's more courage than most grown men can manage. Through the tension, Ethan managed to meet his father's eyes, giving a timid nod. He clung to the certainty that Bruno was right there. The dog's soft fur, his gentle breathing, those small comforts kept Ethan steady, even as danger clawed at the edges of the room. Suddenly, the overhead light flickered. A jolt of alarm rippled among them. If the intruders tried to knock out power, they might compromise the building's security systems. One of the guards cursed under his breath. "They might be cutting power next," he said, stepping toward the door. "If we lose power, we'll lose some of our electronic locks." Parker's eyes widened. "Then we're stuck in here unless we open up voluntarily." She looked between the father and mother, silently weighing the risks of staying put versus fleeing. "What if the intruders come this way with power tools or explosives? We could be cornered." The father squared his shoulders, thinking of how Ethan had risked his life just by speaking. "Do we have a plan B?" he asked, voice hushed but resolute. Before anyone could answer, a new voice crackled over the radio. "Basement sector, do you copy? Intruders have attempted to cut main power, generators holding for now, but we have reports of tampering with the secondary system. Prepare for potential blackout." A wave of dread washed over them. The mother's hand tightened around Ethan's shoulder. She could feel the faint tremor in his muscles, fear contained by sheer willpower. Even Bruno seemed unnerved, his ears perked, eyes fixed on the door. The guard exhaled, turning to the group. "We can hold position or we can try to move to a safer spot, maybe the loading bay. That area is typically secured by heavier gates, and if the SWAT team arrives, they'll probably use that entrance." Parker looked to Ethan's father. "Your call. There are risks either way. Moving could expose us in the corridors, but staying put might become a death trap if these guys breach the panic room." She hesitated. "They're after the evidence, or Ethan, or both." Ethan's breath hitched at the realization that, in the eyes of these criminals, he was as dangerous as any piece of data. But he also understood something else. He wasn't powerless anymore. He'd taken that step and given his statement. That alone was proof that they couldn't silence him forever. The father, seeing a flicker of resolve in the boy's face, made his decision. "We move," he declared, voice trembling with a resolute edge. "If we get cornered here, there's no escape route. At least in the loading bay, we have a chance to link up with any incoming backup." One of the guards gave a terse nod. "Let's do it quickly. I'll lead. You," he pointed to the second officer. "Watch the rear. Keep your weapons ready, but be mindful of friendly fire. This place is crawling with people we don't want to hurt." With that, they formed a tight group. Parker tucked the sealed evidence container into her coat, hugging it close as though it were a small child. The mother wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulders. The father stayed near them, eyes darting for any sign of threat, while the two officers aligned themselves in a defensive formation, guns at the ready. Bruno padded along, strangely calm but hyper-alert, as though sensing that every footstep must be precise and silent. They stepped out into the corridor, each sound amplified by the hush of the basement. Overhead lights flickered again, threatening to plunge them into darkness. Water dripped from overhead pipes, a reminder of the torrential storm outside. Through the walls, the distant rumble of thunder blended with the echo of gunshots or heavy blows. No one could tell which. It was a tapestry of chaos. Moving swiftly, they navigated a series of storage rooms and maintenance passages, each locked door requiring a security keycard from the guard. At every corner, hearts pounded with the fear of what might lie beyond. Twice, they heard scuffling footsteps close by and halted, breath caught in throats, only to see frightened courthouse staff huddling behind crates. The father ushered them to a safer path, signaling for silence. Within minutes, they reached the corridor that led to the loading bay. The large steel gate at the end was sealed shut, but the guard approached a keypad to unlock it. "Let's hope the power surge didn't fry the controls," he muttered. As he keyed in the code, the door inched open with a groan. At the same moment, a surge of radio chatter erupted. "All units, main power compromised. Secondary system at risk. Lockdown recommended across all floors." The door slid open just enough for them to see flickering emergency lights in the loading area. A forklift stood abandoned, and a few crates were scattered about. But something else caught Ethan's eye, a silhouette moving in the gloom close to the perimeter fence. Instantly, his chest tightened. Could it be the intruders? Before the group could slip through, the overhead lights flickered one final time and cut out entirely. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Their frantic whispers overlapped as the guard fumbled with a flashlight. In that heartbeat of pitch-black confusion, a voice, deep and sinister, echoed from somewhere ahead in the loading bay. "You're making this harder than it has to be. Hand over the kid, and we'll let everyone else walk out." Chills raced down Ethan's spine. The father inhaled sharply, trying to steady his breathing, while Parker cursed under her breath, hands tightening around the container with the memory card. In the darkness, Bruno tensed, his head raised as though pinpointing the direction of the voice. It was the moment they had feared, since the day Ethan first glimpsed that gun in the park. This confrontation was no longer theoretical. It was here, real and unavoidable. Now in a pitch-black corridor with unknown enemies inches away, everyone understood that their next move would be decisive. Was there a path to safety, or would they be forced into a standoff that could cost them everything? A single question pulsed in the damp, suffocating darkness. Darkness clung to every surface in the corridor as the main power finally gave out, leaving only the feeble glow of a single flashlight trembling in the guard's hand. Ethan, his heart hammering, could see little more than vague outlines. Yet the voice echoing from the loading bay was painfully clear, deep, cold, and uncompromising. "Hand over the kid, and the rest of you walk out of here alive." Silence followed. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Even Bruno stood rigid, tail down, muzzle lifted, picking up the intruder's scent. Ethan's mother grabbed her son's arm, pressing him close. The father lifted a trembling hand, signaling for everyone to remain still. Defense attorney Parker, desperately clutching the sealed container with Ethan's testimony, held her breath and considered the weight of the threat. A swirl of lightning from outside illuminated the loading bay for one ghostly instant, revealing the silhouette of a large figure near a stack of crates. Then darkness reclaimed the space. The father drew in a slow breath. "We can't give them Ethan, but if we do nothing, they might force their way in." In response to the father's signal, one of the guards dropped to a knee, raising his sidearm to aim into the blackness. The intruder's voice returned, mocking and deceptively calm. "Don't be stupid. You have no idea how outnumbered you are." As though on cue, another pair of silhouettes flickered into sight when lightning flashed once more, armed men taking cover behind a forklift. A storm was raging outside, and a storm of fear swirled within. The father swallowed hard, then called out, "Who are you people? Why threaten a kid?" A bitter chuckle echoed. "Because that kid's testimony can ruin everything. Raymond doesn't like loose ends. Now this is your last warning. Send him out here or we come in shooting." In that fraction of a second, Ethan felt a renewed wave of terror surge through him, memories of the park confrontation flashing behind his eyes. He thought of how many nights he'd woken up drenched in sweat, haunted by that gun pointed at him. But then his gaze landed on Bruno, and the dog's unwavering presence pushed a spark of resolve into his chest. He'd already taken a stand by speaking. He couldn't surrender now. The guard glanced at Parker, who raised her hand slightly to show she wanted to speak. Her voice was steady despite the quake in her gut. "Ethan's under the protection of this court. If you harm him, you'll only confirm your guilt before a much larger audience." She hoped it would intimidate them, but the intruder barked a harsh laugh. Outside, thunder boomed, rattling the metal doors. Another flicker of lightning sketched shadows across the group. In that moment, Parker spotted a path. If the guards could draw the intruder's attention, maybe Ethan and his family could slip through a side route that led to the interior ramp, away from the loading bay. She leaned toward the father and mother, her voice barely audible. "There's an emergency exit about 20 yards down that hall," she whispered. "If we can reach it, we can double back to the upper floors, where the police might be holding a perimeter." The father gave a tight nod. Their choices were narrow: stay and risk an open shootout, or attempt an escape. The mother's grip on Ethan's arm tightened. The guard with the flashlight motioned for them to move when he gave the signal. A hush descended. Then the father spoke up, raising his voice to the intruders. "Fine, we'll talk about it," he shouted. feigning negotiation to buy precious seconds. In the darkness, footsteps sounded, someone creeping closer. The father's pulse thundered in his ears as he waited for the moment to break. Suddenly, the guard aimed the flashlight beam directly at the forklift. "Get down!" he roared to the family, flicking the beam to disorient the intruders. The father flung himself sideways, pulling Ethan and his wife into a crouch. Parker ducked low, clutching the evidence container to her chest. Gunshots erupted, echoing like cracks of thunder. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off the concrete walls. Bruno growled, pressed against Ethan, shielding him as best he could. The mother stifled a scream. Adrenaline pounded through Ethan's veins as he realized that only a hairbreadth separated them from lethal danger. The guard returned fire, forcing the intruders to scatter. A second guard covered the retreat. Parker tugged Ethan's mother's sleeve, urging them to crawl along the corridor toward the emergency exit. The father and mother half-dragged Ethan, keeping low to avoid stray gunfire. Bruno skittered alongside, nails clicking on the concrete in frantic steps. At last, the family reached a dimly lit side door marked "Emergency Exit, No Re-Entry." Parker jammed her shoulder into it, praying it wasn't locked from the other side. With a groan, the door inched open, revealing a small stairwell illuminated by flickering backup lights. Another set of footsteps echoed behind them, a guard, flushed and panting, joining them after laying down suppressing fire. "We need to keep moving," the guard hissed, quickly shoving the door closed and throwing the deadbolt. The sounds of gunfire continued behind them, muffled now by layers of concrete. "Stay together." Heart hammering, Ethan pressed closer to Bruno, trying to calm his ragged breathing. They scurried up a narrow flight of stairs, each step punctuated by the metallic clang of steel toes on metal steps. Lightning flared outside the high, narrow windows, revealing the silhouettes of heavily armed police. Converging on the courthouse entrance, backup had finally arrived. Another flurry of shots resounded below, along with distant shouting. Then came the distinct bark of orders through a megaphone. The father paused, glancing behind them as though uncertain whether to keep fleeing or wait. But Parker pushed him forward, eyes resolute. "If SWAT is here, they'll lock down the building. We need to reach them first. We can't let the intruders corner us again." 2 more flights of stairs brought them to a service corridor in the courthouse's main level. Red emergency lights cast everything in an eerie glow. At the far end of the corridor, a shuttered gate stood half-lowered, behind which SWAT officers seemed to be clearing the area. A surge of hope filled Ethan's chest. If they could just get past that gate, they'd be under police protection. As they hastened forward, footsteps pounded behind them again, heavier, more frantic. One last intruder, perhaps, in dogged pursuit. The mother spun around, fear contorting her features, but the father yanked her toward the gate. "Police!" Parker called, waving the sealed container overhead. "We have the witness and the evidence." The SWAT team turned, weapons at the ready, and parted just enough for them to slip through. Within seconds, they were surrounded by ballistic shields, ushered behind a secure perimeter. 2 officers tackled a black-clad figure who had appeared behind the family, disarming him in one fluid move. All around them, uniforms flashed, commands were shouted, and the courthouse that had been a scene of chaos now swarmed with methodical authority. Ethan, shaking uncontrollably, collapsed to his knees beside Bruno. His parents encircled him, relief and exhaustion etched onto every line of their faces. Parker stood tall, still holding the container, not letting go for an instant. It was a ragged, trembling triumph. They were safe, at least for now. And so was the truth Ethan had fought so hard to bring into the light. Yet the climax of this standoff only revealed a greater challenge. With the immediate danger quelled, how would Ethan's testimony and the mounting evidence finally bring those responsible to justice? And could the court unravel a conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone had dared to imagine? In the aftermath of the standoff, the courthouse corridors bustled with a new, urgent energy, this time tinged with relief rather than fear. The storm outside still raged, lightning casting stark shadows on the walls. But the immediate threat within the building had been contained. Armed officers led the subdued intruders away, confiscating weapons and radios that hinted at a more extensive network of corruption. Meanwhile, in a secured administrative room, Ethan and his family finally caught their breath under the watchful eyes of the SWAT team and courthouse officials. Bruno stood by Ethan, his tail wagging in a subdued rhythm as if sensing that the worst of the crisis had passed. The boy clung to the dog's collar, heart still thundering from the surge of adrenaline. His parents knelt beside him, wordlessly offering comfort. Defense attorney Parker carefully passed the sealed container to a SWAT officer who documented it as critical evidence. The father exhaled a trembling sigh, eyes lifting to meet Parker's steady gaze. "Is it over?" he asked quietly. Though the intruders had been apprehended or repelled, the father's question held a deeper meaning. Would the intimidation, the danger, truly end now? Parker placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We've taken a crucial step. We have Ethan's testimony on record, and we have the partial footage Miss Hodge managed to restore. At the very least, these people won't be able to hide in the shadows anymore. Authorities will investigate every lead, especially the mention of Raymond." Ethan swallowed hard. The name still sent shivers down his spine, but for the first time, he felt a strange surge of pride. He'd faced his deepest terror, both the memory of the gun in the park and the more recent threats, and managed to speak out. The mother noticed the glint of resolve in his eyes. Cupping his cheek with her palm, she whispered, "I'm so proud of you." Outside, the sound of sirens drew closer, signals that additional police units were arriving to secure the perimeter. Journalist Trent Holloway soon emerged, cautiously stepping into the administrative room under the guard's supervision. Though out of breath, Trent's expression lit up with relief upon seeing Ethan unharmed. "Thank heavens," he murmured, then turned to Parker. "Do you have enough to name names?" Parker lifted her chin. "We'll pass everything to the district attorney. Once they link the tampered footage with Ethan's testimony, we can file additional charges. This is bigger than a single assault or an isolated threat. We're looking at conspiracy, intimidation of a minor, possibly more." The father wrapped an arm around Ethan, who instinctively leaned into the embrace. He offered a faint smile of gratitude to the journalist. "Thank you for trying to shine a light on all this," he said. "If these people think they can silence a child and erase evidence, they need to be exposed." Trent nodded, tapping notes into his phone. "I'll report the facts responsibly. And trust me, Ethan's courage will not go unnoticed." "You did good, kid." He flashed a brief grin at the boy, who ducked his head shyly. Meanwhile, an official from the courthouse approached with a solemn expression. "The judge is asking for a debrief. She wants to see Ethan and his family, along with Ms. Parker in her chambers once things settle. She's hoping to reconvene the trial soon, under heavily revised security, of course. We need a formal statement on today's events." Ethan felt a flicker of nerves. He'd already braved speaking once. Did this mean he'd have to do it again? Sensing his trepidation, his mother gently squeezed his arm. "We'll be right by your side," she said softly. Bruno let out a low, content sound, almost like a sigh of relief. In that moment, Ethan reached down, burying his fingers in the dog's fur. It was a quiet gesture, but it spoke volumes. He wasn't alone before, and he wouldn't be alone in what came next. Within the hour, the courthouse resumed a degree of normalcy, though the storm still battered the windows, and a throng of reporters gathered outside. Word had spread about the armed intrusion, the hidden footage, and the boy who had broken his silence in dramatic fashion. By the time Ethan and his parents stepped into the judge's chambers, with Bruno at their side, the tension in the building had receded into a collective resolve to see justice served. The judge, looking exhausted yet resolute, greeted them with a grave nod. "I'm glad you're safe," she said, directing her words to Ethan. "We'll be scheduling an official session soon to continue the trial. In light of everything that happened, we'll make special arrangements to guarantee your security." Her gaze swept over the parents, Parker, and the guards. "You've all witnessed today how far certain individuals will go to silence the truth. We won't let them succeed." A hush settled. Ethan felt the gravity of her words sink in. "They won't let them succeed," he repeated inwardly. It was more than a promise of legal protection. It was a vow that the system would stand behind him. He couldn't help but reflect on the past weeks, on how powerless he'd felt after seeing that confrontation in the park, how the threat had kept him mute. Yet here he stood, shoulders lighter from having shared the secret that haunted him. He could finally exhale, unburdened. The father exchanged a look with the mother, who gave a slight nod. Addressing the judge, he said, "We're ready to move forward, Your Honor. This has to end, not just for Ethan, but for anyone else who might be threatened by these people." Parker placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder, her agreement evident in her eyes. It took another week for the trial to formally resume. By that time, investigators had begun mapping the tangled connections leading back to Raymond, enough to arrest him on conspiracy charges. Ethan's recorded testimony, combined with the partially recovered footage and Ms. Hodges' forensic analysis, formed the backbone of a powerful case against the conspirators. Meanwhile, the family remained under close protection, receiving messages of support from across the community. When Ethan finally stood in a newly secured courtroom, the place felt transformed. No longer just a stage of tension, but a platform for justice. With each word of his testimony, Ethan's voice grew steadier. He remembered every detail: the men's heated argument, the name Raymond, the menacing warning. He told the court how he'd been terrified for himself and his dog, how he'd nearly given up on ever speaking again, until he realized that his silence would only let the real criminals remain invisible. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at the hush of the audience, who hung on every sentence. At the conclusion, Ethan took a trembling breath. This time, instead of fear, he felt an unmistakable sense of relief. He had done it. He had testified fully and honestly, shielded by the unity of his parents, Parker, the vigilant officers, and the unshakable bond he shared with Bruno. The dog, resting at his feet, seemed to sense the significance of the moment. His tail gave a single, joyous wag. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, a wave of profound gratitude and admiration swept through everyone who heard Ethan's story. Justice was within reach, all because a brave boy refused to let fear silence him, and a devoted dog stood by his side every step of the way. Thank you for joining us on this intense emotional journey. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that delve into courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and their beloved companions. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you'll know whenever we share a new video. Stay safe, stay strong, and remember, even in the darkest trials, a single voice can light the path to justice. We'll see you in the next video.